Hello and welcome to another HanDrinksSolo wine info video. And today we're discussing a wine made by a team of winemakers called Fledge Co, based up in Calitzdorp. And I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot more of Fledge Co because they're just such an adventurous little team. The wine that we're focusing on today is called the Klipspringer Chenin Blanc 2018, and it is made from two separate parcels of dryland farm Chenin that are each about 50 years old. One is grown in schist soils on top of the Calitzdorp in the Swartland, and the other is grown down on the Paardeberg on decomposed granite. But we can talk about those soils on another day. For those of you not familiar with South African wildlife, a Klipspringer is an incredibly resilient little antelope who makes his home amongst the craggy rocks and dusty scrub of the hot, dry Swartland. Not unlike the rather resilient cultivar of Chenin Blanc. And I want us to just stop for a minute and think about just how resilient Chenin Blanc is. Because this is the Loire. This is where Chenin Blanc was born. This is where it grew up. This is the Swartland. They are worlds apart.
Speaking metaphorically, of course.
Yet Chenin Blanc has somehow managed to thrive and adapt to the point where now, from the Swartland, we managed to get some of the best Chenin Blancs in the world. I mean, it's like taking a lily-livered Norwegian hospice worker and dropping him into the back of the Australian outback and then coming back a few years later and finding he's turned into Crocodile Dundee. A rather unlikely outcome. Yet, that is exactly the kind of personal metamorphosis that I'm talking about with Chenin Blanc. And it's gone even further than that. Having talked to the founder of the Old Vine Project, Rosa Creer, she tells me that French ampelographers have come out to South Africa specifically to study natural mutations of Chenin Blanc. In other words, clones of Chenin Blanc that have arisen in South Africa only and exist nowhere else in the world. And they're now taking them back to France in a kind of Elton John circle of life kind of way. A young Chenin Blanc has now grown up and got fiercer and stronger and more diverse and is traveling back to its homeland in order to strengthen the genetic pool of the Chenin Blanc of the Loire. Enough Disney analogies, surely. By now you might want to know what's in the glass. So let's give it a sniff. Again, I think this serves as a delightful case study for Chenin Blanc because it does have two fairly classic elements in it. It's got fairly pronounced stone fruit, peaches, a little bit of apricot, and it's also got elements of citrus, orange, even a little bit of white grapefruit. What elevates it from kind of nice to #OMG is the fact that there's this added slightly salty saline element again, as on other wines we've discussed, as well as a kind of dusty gravel road type note. At this point, you might guffaw. Oh, wine folk, they're so ridiculous, talking nigh on orgasmically about dusty gravel roads. And yet, when your nana goes out after a rainstorm and says, "Oh, I love the smell of the moist earth after a thunderstorm," we accept that as normal. We're fine for nana to talk about moist earth in a completely positive sense. And yet, when wine folk want to spasm about a dusty gravel road in their glass, it's seen as weird. I say nay. So when we sip it, we get more of the same. There is a lovely sense of that sweeter peach fruit up front, and then there's some orange that comes behind it, and there's a little bit of a bitter snap on the end. But rather than just focus on the flavor notes, which is, I guess, the what of what we're tasting, I want to talk about how it is that we experience those, because that to me is more interesting on this particular wine. The first thing that surprises me about this wine is just how textured it is, because the sweeter peach fruit up front presents as quite thick on the palate. And just as you think it's about to get cloying, all of a sudden there's this much fresher apricot acidity and even a textured, dry kind of orange pith that comes through. And then right at the end, there's that lovely bitter grapefruit snap that almost makes you forget that anything was sweet to start off with. And that's why you can keep taking sips all night without ever getting bored, because each new sip hits you as if it's the first sip of the night. That's the sort of complexity that I think elevates a wine from nice poolside quaffer to a more serious wine adventure. And finally, I'm sure that you've noticed over time that I have been mentioning saline elements in wine quite a lot. So what I want you to do is just humor me on this. When you take a sip of this wine, I want you to meditate, yes, I said meditate, on the saltiness. Take a sip and try to identify nothing other than the salty elements in the wine. You'll be amazed at how by focusing on one particular aspect of the wine, you can change the way that everything else presents itself to you. So you might ask, well, how was this wine made? And you'd be surprised to learn that the winemaking itself was incredibly simple. There are no fancy oak barrels or foudre or amphoras. In fact, this wine was simply fermented in stainless steel tanks, then racked off into smaller tanks and left on fine lees for about a year. But that's kind of the point, because by keeping the winemaking as simple as possible, you allow the complexities, like we discussed earlier, of the fact that these two old vine parcels are in fact grown on completely different soils. So the fact that the winemaking is really simple means that we can sit and ponder all those other variables all night long. But I'm going to leave the pondering up to you because I'm out of time on this one. Please leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this particular old vine Chenin Blanc made by folk in Calitzdorp but sourced entirely from the Swartland. And if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, then why not subscribe to the HanDrinksSolo wine community channel so that you can stay up to date with the videos that I publish each week about rising South African winemaking stars, niche cultivars, or sometimes the odd South African classic and the way it's making waves around.